Today we're going to tell you about a copycat.
Of this place. Hi, welcome to Around the World with Joshua and Alyssa and baby Jocelyn today. She wanted to join us, so we had no choice but to let her in. We are going to tell you about a really neat place in the Dominican Republic that we got to visit. So let's get right into it. Now, if you have watched our episodes for a while, you may remember that I went to the Christ the Redeemer statue in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Well, Puerto Plata in the Dominican Republic has their own version of the Christ the Redeemer statue. And it looks like this.
Dun, dun, dun.
Looks a lot similar, doesn't it? Let's see if we can...
Just on a sunny day.
Yep.
Very sunny day.
So that's the one in Brazil. This is the one in the Dominican Republic. It actually is not the same size.
No.
It is smaller. But it looks very, very similar. So when you go to this place, this is the visitor center, the entrance to the cable car that takes you up. So you can drive up, or you can take the cable car up to the statue. And so we took the cable car, and after we had paid, we got to be treated to some Caribbean music, and so that was a lot of fun. Actually, one of the ladies who was visiting, she went up there and played the accordion with them because she was pretty good.
She was pretty good.
We didn't even know that she was just a tourist until she gave the accordion back and sat down. So that was a lot of fun. So, in order to get up, I mentioned the cable car. And so here it is. This cable car, I don't remember how many it fits, like 20 people.
Pretty roomy.
Yeah. And so you step inside and then off you go. Up. Now you can kind of see in this picture where we're headed, that tall mountain. The farther you go up this thing, the more, I don't know, I guess you would say nerve-wracking it gets, because you're looking down so far and you realize that if this wasn't safe, which it is.
It's a long drop down.
Yeah. And then it gets really steep at one point. So you're not just going at an angle, you're going at a very steep angle straight up, almost like up the side of a cliff. So kind of scary. This is what it looks like from the other side as you're leaving the place. So this is once you get all the way to the top.
Can't even see it anymore.
Yeah. So now it's just tiny houses and buildings and city and forest down there. Yeah. So that is what it looks like. Yeah, I can't even see the
original building.
Yeah, it's down there somewhere. Anyway, this is up on the top of a tall mountain, and the reason it is there is because if you'll see in a moment, but the statue is actually built on top of a dome. And this mountain here it had like a fortress on top, and it was used to defend the city, especially from enemy aircraft, and so they had anti-aircraft artillery up there. Well, in 1970, they decided that they would put a statue up here because, actually, let me back up. They had the idea in 1970 of putting a cable car to go up here so that people could visit. By then, the fortress was no longer used anymore, and so it was just like a tourist site. So a guy got the idea, let's make a cable car so that people can come all the way up here instead of driving up here. So they started doing that in 1971 and in 1972. And then they also decided, let's make this place up here into a botanical garden. And so if you look off to the left, you can see all sorts of plants and such. And there's a cute picture of us. And a lot of foliage up here. And it is we'll show you in a moment, this place is like a huge park. The statue up here
Really
is
cool.
just a small part of it. Well, eventually they decided, you know what, let's turn this fortress into something. And so they decided to build a statue on top of Christ the Redeemer because they really liked the one that was in Brazil. So they decided they wanted to add their own here. This is the one at the top of the mountain. This is the one in Brazil. So
Much
now
bigger.
now you can get a little better idea of the resemblance. I think the faces are slightly different too. You'd have to look pretty close to decide for yourself. But yeah, so there's the one in Brazil. A lot more space up there for tourists too. But as we mentioned, a lot of garden area up here, a lot of walkways. So baby Jaden loved it. In fact, we just wanted to stand and look at the statue for a while, and he wanted to go explore other things. And he got wet too. But here are some steps going down into the garden area. And it was kind of rainy that day, so we kind of had it all to ourselves. People weren't really walking around that much. But here is a map of the whole place. And if you look down in the bottom right of the map, that's where the cable car comes up. And then that big gray splotch there, just to the upper left of that, is where the statue is. So then all the rest of that space is garden and a whole bunch of really neat things that we didn't get to see. Some pools and different kinds of plants. We were just up in that little area in the bottom of this heart-shaped garden. So here are some more of the plants that we got to see and take pictures with. Oh, it was so pretty. I really wish we could have had a whole day just to explore up there. But there's another look, a better view of the whole dome with the statue on top. And you can kind of see how it would have been a fortress and how they would have had artillery stationed through those windows. But yeah, that is the Christ the Redeemer statue in Puerto Plata. So I have seen two now.
It's kind of like a random thing that we looked up and decided to try, but we decided it was definitely worth it.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed it.
And I had never heard of another one being anywhere else. I know, you know, like there is the Eiffel Tower, and then you go somewhere else in the world and they have their own version of the Eiffel Tower, and you go somewhere else and but I didn't know that someone else had their own version of the Christ the Redeemer statue.
Or Statue of Liberty. I think there's one in Paris too somewhere.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that one.
And I think there might be one in Asia somewhere.
Huh?
I
Cool.
think.
Well, now I gotta do some more research. Okay, well, I have some more story for you.
Okay. I will go have snacks with Baby Jocelyn.
Okay. We ended last time where Greasy and his friends, especially his friend George, went with him, and they basically turned themselves in to the leaders of the village. And the judge, the district attorney, everybody was just shocked that these guys just came forward and said what they had done, and that they accepted full responsibility of it. And we ended last time saying that Greasy said he was all done with that nickname. He really wanted to go back to his original name, and that was Pasha. And he was willing to accept whatever result was going to have to come, whatever consequence was going to have to come from all the things that he had done. And he understood that. But he trusted that Jesus was his savior and that he didn't have to be scared of all the things to come. Well, right away, the district attorney decided that these guys needed to be put in jails, but they needed to be in separate cells so they couldn't talk with each other. And then he called them in one by one to kind of recount and tell the things that they had done, and kind of just to see how their stories all lined up, which they all lined up perfectly because the guys were telling exactly the truth. And they kept going through and investigating each one, and he just kept shaking his head. He could not believe these guys just were turning themselves in. Usually if that happens, it's because there's like a big mountain of evidence against somebody, and then they finally say that, okay, yes, I did it. But these guys, there was nothing, and they were just admitting to everything they had done. And it kind of started to puzzle the district attorney especially. And the officers of the area, he thought, why is the gospel this powerful that these guys are making a decision like this that could change the rest of their lives? Well, we're going to follow the story a little bit with the district attorney. This is the guy that they were talking to. And his name was Yuri. And he just went home and he just was still shaking his head and he could not believe what had happened that day. So he told his wife this story about these guys and how they had done all of these terrible crimes and they were just confessing them. And she was pretty surprised too. She said, well, I do remember reading at one point in the New Testament about a thief, but he couldn't go anywhere. But he told Jesus that he knew what he did was wrong, and maybe that's kind of like what got into these guys. And Yuri said, well, don't you think maybe we should read this New Testament? And his wife said, well, I already read it, but I don't understand why it would make these guys act the way they are acting. It doesn't make any sense to me. So while his wife was working on dinner, Yuri went into the library and he looked around to see if he could find their New Testament. Then he got a pair of glasses and he sat down and he opened it up and he started to read. And he read lots of different stories from the Gospels. And as a judge, one of the things that was really hard for him to read was the story of Judas Iscariot and how Judas betrayed Jesus and he traded Jesus for money from the religious leaders. And Yuri just thought that was terrible, that Judas deserved a really bad penalty for making that choice to betray Jesus. Well, he continued to read in the Gospels, and he got to a verse. Let's see if I can find it back here. He got to a verse in John 12:32. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. And that was Jesus talking. And Yuri thought, well, that was interesting. So this must have something to do with Jesus being crucified, he thought, and that when Jesus died, it would draw people to him to understand who he was. Well, he kept reading. He read the story about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. He thought that was an incredible story. And he read about how Jesus was crucified and how he said at the end, it is finished, and that he had done what God had called him to do. Then he saw the words at the end of the chapter. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. John 12:48. And Yuri began to think, wow, I have done a lot of wrong, and I will have to be judged one day. Just like I am a judge, someday I'm going to have to give an account for the things I've done in my life. Well, he went and he ate supper with his wife, and he just kept thinking these things over, and they kept talking about these men and the choices that they made. And he went to bed that night, but Yuri couldn't sleep. He just kept thinking that over and over in his mind. I'm going to have to answer to a judge. What am I going to say for the things that I've done? And what did Jesus do? Jesus came and he lived a perfect life, and he died a death that he didn't really need to die. He hadn't done anything wrong, but Jesus had chosen to die in that place to give eternal life, and that he had risen again from the dead. And so Yuri decided the next morning, he got out of his bed and he knelt down beside his bed and he told God how he was trusting that Jesus had paid for his sins and that he didn't have to be judged for his sins anymore, that he was taking Jesus' payment as his own payment, so he didn't have to pay for his sins anymore. Well, he told his wife, and he was very excited. Yuri was very excited that he had made this decision and that he was going to follow Jesus just like these robbers basically had, and that he wanted Jesus to change his life too. And his wife was like, you're kind of crazy. I don't know why you're making a big deal out of this. And Yuri decided he really wanted to change what he was doing with his life. So instead of just judging people, he wanted to help other people hear about this good news too. So he walked into the office and he quit his job right away and said his new plan was that he was going to move on and help other people hear this good news, just like these robbers had heard this good news that had changed their lives. He was ready for it to change his life. Well, about a year later, Pasha and his friends were going to be put on trial, and they were going to have to stand before a judge, and they were going to get a sentence. So do you think they were going to get a sentence that they could just go because they had admitted to all these things that they had done? Do you think they were going to get a death penalty sentence because they had hurt a lot of people, and that could be right? Or were they going to get a sentence that they were going to have to be in prison for the rest of their lives? You're going to have to come back next time and see what happens to them.
I knew you were going to do that.
Well, that's how it ends. I mean, that's how we pause it, I guess. It's the magical words.
All right. Well, let's tell them about our missionary for today, who's somebody that you really like.
Yeah. We're going to talk about my dad today, David Levy. David A. Levy, because I have a brother who's also David Levy, but he's David J. So my dad went to the Democratic Republic of Congo back in end of October, beginning of November, about the time we were in the Dominican Republic, actually. And here's my dad with some of the people he went. My dad's the one on the far right in the bright blue shirt. And he went with a missionary couple and somebody else to do some training in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is my dad's first big trip out of the country doing something like this. And so I think it was quite the learning curve for him. I think he has a better appreciation for what missionaries go through too. He got to speak at a church service, well, speak through an interpreter, because my dad doesn't speak enough French to preach a full sermon. But he really enjoyed the chance to get to meet these believers in Africa and to just get to experience a little bit of what their church life is like. And then their real reason for going was to do some training. So this missionary contact that my dad had, his name is Sparky, and Sparky had planted a church. I think that's why we had this picture here of a church. Sparky had planted a church, and then out of the church, there were some men who he had really started investing in as leaders. So here are the men who are like the leaders of the area. And so these leaders really wanted to have some extra training. So my dad went down and they did a lot of training for these guys on how they could share the gospel, how they could build relationships with people, and how they could use the stories of the Bible to point people back to who Jesus is. So they spent a few days talking about the importance of the Bible, and then they used some things that we've used before, like the story of hope, but in French. And they used the pictures, and they taught these men how they could use these tools as good ways to share the gospel. So my dad got to help with some of the teaching. He said it was really hot. They're just in this little room with a couple windows and lots of sweatiness, I think. For him anyways, he wasn't quite used to that. But they used the pictures and the stories that we know really well, and they used those with these guys to tell the stories that are from the Bible. Then after they trained these guys really, really well, they brought in 50 people, and now those guys helped train these 50 people how they could tell the story, use the story of hope to share the gospel, and how they could build relationships with people. So my dad said that was really cool to watch these guys go from learning, from being trained with them, to going and teaching it right away. And the people just loved it. They really, really enjoyed using the materials, and they're really excited to tell their friends and family and neighbors about the good news of the gospel, and that Jesus loves them, and that they can have a relationship with the God of the universe. That's pretty amazing. While my dad was there, he really likes to go running. So he didn't stop that tradition at all. He started running while he was there, and I think the kids of the area thought it was pretty funny. So we've got a little video here to show you.
Here they come.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
So he would go out and he kept up his plan of running, and he looks pretty hot and sweaty there. But these kids from the area would come and run along with him. And he thought it was such a cool thing to be able to see these kids. And he one time pulled out his Bible and read to them John 3:16 in French. He said he felt like it was a little bit rough, but that was what he could do. And then one of the last days, another missionary who did speak the language came and was able to share the gospel with these kids who came to run alongside with my dad. And so he was really burdened for the kids of the area and was really thankful for the opportunity he had to teach these adults.
And how many people did they have on the last day?
I don't know. It was a crazy number, whatever it was.
Yeah, I felt like he even said it was like 100 kids.
Yeah, I think it was a lot, and then maybe some of the other people came too. But yeah, so that was my dad and a little bit of his time he spent in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I just stop and think about what the country name
It's
is.
kind of tricky when you go from saying Dominican Republic to Democratic Republic of
Okay,
Congo.
maybe that's what it is.
That's what it is, I think, because they're so close, but they're different. And we were in the same those two different places at the same time, so
yeah.
we're switching back and forth between the two.
Yep.
So
That was pretty cool, though. He was really excited to take the trip, and then I think he learned a lot and really just loved seeing the enthusiasm of these believers at getting training to be able to share the gospel with people.
yeah. So that is all for this week. Come back, join us next week. We're going to tell you about something else that we saw in the Dominican Republic that was really neat, and we'll share with you another missionary update.
Yep. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.